No, it's just like really nice, finally getting to, talk one-on-one, and see how you use Rome.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually grateful to have this opportunity. I'm just glad that when I reached out to you, it was like we were able to make this time. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that these things that Rome can get really conceptual, I guess, really fast.
yes,
And
yes,
for a lot of
yes.
people
We're
who
gonna talk about that.
okay, cool. And for a lot of people that are like newer, I guess, to Rome, who don't really like understand kind of what a linked reference means or what a block reference means, it's like it can just be
Yeah,
kind of hard to understand without really just taking a look. So
yeah,
I do these tours, one because like I upload the tours because I think it's helpful for people to take a look
yeah,
at it, especially when they're learning. But I do these tours really just because I like meeting people in the Rome community
yeah.
who are using it, this incredibly powerful and versatile tool,
Mhm.
in really interesting ways. So.
I think it's interesting that you say tool, because that to me is not a noun, it's a verb. And it's an
Mhm.
action. It's like to drive a vehicle. It's the tool aspect that I really focus on above all else. And you also mentioned, conceptualization. And I think conceptualization is awesome. You know what I mean? Because it takes that sort of, people need to conceptualize in order to sort of wrap their head around it. But I value actualization more. And
Mhm.
there's three different phases in the Zettelkasten. There's a fleeting note phase, there's a literature note phase, and then there's an actual permanent note phase, right? And people have sort of used this analogy of seedlings, budding notes, and evergreen notes, and I think it's powerful, right? And I think that is a great way to sort of, as a metaphor, see that relationship between each one of these phases. But what I realized is that it inherently adds meaning to the Zettelkasten that makes it harder for people. And what I mean by that is uh, uh, it adds this dimension of time, because when you think about a seedling, it takes time to grow into a budding note. It takes time to grow into an evergreen note. And this idea of time it makes things harder, right? And I'll explain as we go through this whole process. But and so I wrestled with this idea for weeks, and then I was thinking about what's a better way of saying this. And for me, the three different phases that we go through when creating a permanent note, in order to sort of have this conversation partner, I started thinking about it differently. I was like, well, what if we related this to the three states of matter, right? So you have gas, you have liquid, and you have solid, right? And it relates very well because I think about gas. And what is gas? Gas is just fast moving particles. It's like fast moving thoughts, right? And
Yeah.
what happens, it's fast moving thoughts. And it's like, what happens if we start slowing down these fast moving thoughts or slowing down these fast moving particles? What happens? It starts becoming liquid, right? And you'll get this precipitation, and it'll start dripping. And so you're taking these fast moving thoughts and you're sort of slowing these thoughts down into a liquid. But a liquid with no sort of container is just a puddle on the ground. And then I started thinking about it. It's like, well, what is the reference notes? What is the bibliography? What is the sort of evidence, right? And if that could be the container to capture this liquid of these slowing down the thoughts, the literature notes are contained in the reference notes, or they're contained in the bibliography or the evidence, right? And so now you have this container filled with this liquid of thoughts that have been slowed down, and then you can start crystallizing it into a solid state in the permanent note phase. And I like this way of looking at it, because then it takes, because we don't want a conversation with the fleeting notes. We don't want a conversation with the literature notes, because fleeting notes is just fast moving thoughts. It's just fast resonated ideas. And then literature notes is just sort of what you've abstracted or inferred from what the author is saying. What you want is, you want the conversation to happen at the permanent note phase. And so it's like, if you can slam those three phases as tight as we can in regards to time, what happens is then we start focusing on what the importance of a Zettelkasten is, and that's actually the permanent note conversation. And so again, I have to lay this groundwork down just so we can get into the sort of Zettelkasten idea,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a lot of concepts that have to sort of click, right? And the next thing is going to be sort of this conversation partner, right? And we'll get into all that. What are you thinking? You're about to say,
Yeah.
you have a question.
Well, I want to maybe like jump back for a second, you know, and just to slow this down a little bit. So
Yeah.
going back, one of the things you mentioned is that there is a problem with analogies that people use, you know, like the different analogies people use to describe the different phases of a thought in a Zettelkasten is going
Yeah.
to have different implications for what you do with them, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're thinking about it as fleeting and permanent, you know, like permanent, for example, implies this is fixed and it's never changing, you know, and then seedling, budding, evergreen notes, that adds a dimension of time. And you are talking about gas versus liquid and solid, and that the solid notes, that's what you want to have to manipulate, you know, like that's what you want to have to
Exactly.
use, maybe to make it so your conversations are more focused. So like if someone has thousands of gaseous thoughts, you know, like then it's kind of hard to make sense of all that because a lot of that's probably crap anyway, you know. So it's like you want to do it, you want to work with your solid thoughts, right? So am I
Yes.
gathering all that correctly?
Yes. And it's that idea that when you have solid thoughts that are backed by evidence from multiple levels of abstraction, then what happens is the conversation is now a very well-informed conversation partner. It's a strong man or iron man conversation
Mm-hmm.
partner. And then it's also not just focused on one topic, but it's varied topics of interest. And so then when you have a sort of dialogue with this conversation partner, you're having the strongest like you want someone that can argue as best as you can, right? And that's what we're looking for in a Zettelkasten. We want this conversation or dialogue partner to have that sort of relationship with where, you know, no one can out argue us, you know, but if we
Yeah.
write it in our own words and if we crystallize these thoughts with evidence, abstracting it multiple times, then what happens is then the dialogue that happens at the permanent note phase or the solid phase, what happens is then you're able to actually converse with this and trust in this because it's informed, it's evidence-based, and it's abstracted from your own words. And we'll get into
Okay.
all that.
Okay,
And
yeah,
so
I'd
for
love
me,
to see a
yeah,
visual. I'd really love to see a visual of this, you know,
okay.
because I want to see how these ideas kind of like go through their different phases, you know, or if there
Mm.
even is like a fluid pipeline between all these phases, you know, because I think that's really where I think a lot of people would benefit a lot.
Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick.
Great.
So I just want to start off by saying, you know, for me, it's all about simplicity. So I want to be able to hide the complexity behind this. So I'm just gonna start with a timestamp, and I'm gonna make a child block underneath, right? And then I'll
Mm-hmm.
just zoom into that by clicking onto the bullet point. And now I'm just going to start with this idea of fleeting notes, right? When you think about a fleeting note, you're reading a block of text, right? And say I'm reading a block of text. And what I want to do is I want to sort of abstract out what is resonating with me, right? Because these are the sort of fast moving thoughts, right? So I'm just going to go and start off with, let's say, fleeting notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to make a children block underneath. And I've already done the work here, so I'm just going to go and copy and paste it here. But this
Okay.
is going to give you an idea. What were you going to say?
No, I was just saying, okay, keep going.
And so basically, this is going to give you an idea of sort of the thoughts that I've abstracted, right? And as I'm reading a block of text, I'll show you the source material in a minute, but as I'm reading this block of text, these are just sort of the ideas, not necessarily what the text is about, but these are all the sort of ideas that resonated with me. It's all the things that sort of, oh, this reminds me of this. This is like when you're having a conversation with somebody and you're able to sort of pop from one conversation to the next. It's like, that's what this first sort of phase is. It's sort of gathering all these fast moving ideas, right? And so this is the sort of first level of abstraction. It's sort of just writing this out. And the power of Rome is that with one click, I can hide that entire wall of text, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that this is the sort of first pass that I do, right? And then as I scroll through here, and then what I do is I actually go back here and I abstract even more. So I'll write more text here. I'm just going to go and show you what that looks like. And this is important because we have to remember, let me find out where all the text is. Copy this. I'm just going to delete all this. And then I'm just going to go and paste the new sort of thing. So what I'm doing now is I'm sort of going into depth. I'm going even more in depth on what I've abstracted. So I'm sort of adding these, I'm really bringing out everything that I can about all the different ideas that have sort of resonated with me. And the purpose of this is because this is going to inform how I abstract what the author is saying. Right? So I keep going down, These are just all my notes, and I just keep writing and I keep writing. And again, I have to say it, it's like, even with this very streamlined workflow, it takes me anywhere between 15 to 45 minutes to actually complete from fleeting note phase to permanent note phase, and like have it as a permanent note in the Zettelkasten. And it's important to remember that, because this is the work. And so once I've abstracted this, everything that I can, what I'm going to do is...
I think that's something that's really important that a lot of people struggle to recognize a little bit, is that, you know, like going through and like really taking notes, or like really writing out your own thoughts and your own ideas, like that's part of the work of knowledge work. Like you've got to ask yourself, what's your process for coming up with ideas? What's your process for picking out which ones are the best ones? What's your process for developing the promising ones into something that's truly special? You know, like these are all things that take time, they take effort, you know, but if you really want to improve your understanding of the world and your efficacy in interacting with it through your knowledge, then this is what you do.
You're absolutely right. Now, just imagine, I'm going to add a little foreshadowing here, but imagine if you could have all of this available with one click, and we'll get into that. But let me continue. So basically what you have here now is this big wall of text, right? And this big wall of text is sort of open and closed with one bullet point. Again, the power of Rome is that the granularity happens at the block level, not the page level. Traditionally, this would all fit inside of a page, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go here and I'm actually going to summarize that entire wall of text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a sort of low resolution thumbnail of this big block of text, right? And the purpose of that is so if I don't want to see all that text, I can just open and close it if need be, but I have a low resolution thumbnail summarizing what that block of text is if I need to go in there to get a little bit more context.
Oh, I do the same thing. I do the same thing with my meeting notes. You know, like my top level bullet for every meeting, it says it's a page reference to meeting notes, and it's a page reference to the person's name who I'm interacting with. And then it's just a description of what we talked about in the meeting. That's the top level bullet for everything. Underneath it has all the specific details, but you got to give yourself these little clues.
On the block level here, at the parent block level. And that's the sort of, and I've added these little CSS. So here's the thing, I prefer vanilla, just because through these coaching sessions, I've realized that if you have themes that are too outrageous, what happens, it sort of takes away, like, where am I? So I have vanilla Rome with sprinkles of CSS, and we'll get into all that. So basically, again, you have it on the block level, just like you were saying, the summary and all this big wall of text that's collapsible and expandable with one click, right? So now I'm going to go here, I'm going to go ahead and add another block above this, right? And then this is going to be the sort of literature notes. And then this is the same thing. I'm going to have children block underneath. But this is really where the power of Rome shines, is because when you think about a literature note in these fleeting notes, right, you have to remember that when Luhmann started developing this Zettelkasten, you know, this is in the 1950s, you know.
Yeah.
So 1950s, you could. So we have to remember that in the 50s, 1950s, when Luhmann sort of developed, you know, started practicing this sort of Zettelkasten, he could read an article in the morning, and wrestle with that idea throughout the day, right? Without distractions, without notifications, without mail and emails and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And so he actually had the time to wrestle and abstract out these ideas. So he could get away with saying 2 words for his fleeting notes, right? Because he was wrestling with the ideas anyway. So at the end of the night, when he was processing these into sort of literature notes and permanent notes, he already did the work. He already did the abstracting. And so what we're doing is, I don't want to live off the grid, right? But I still want to be able to abstract. And following this sort of process, you can abstract just like you would if you spent all day abstracting it in your head, in your mind, thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And so this is where it's sort of, because everything's at the block level, you can collapse that. And so now we're going to go into the literature notes, and just with that same idea, right? And by the way, there is a source material that I'm reading off of here. It's not that I'm just making this up.
You know what, before we move on to the literature notes, I'd like to ask, so one thing I'm noticing is you have very few page references in there, besides like just to fleeting notes, to literature notes, and yeah, so I'm just curious about that, because like, at least in my own workflow, like my equivalent to fleeting notes, I have thousands of them, so like I personally like being able to compress it down, filter it down, in the linked references. So I'm just kind of like curious about that.
Something like this, right? Where you have like,
or I guess like just
pages.
the question that I have is that, like, do you do any topic level sorting and filtering, or alternatively, is this more of like a stages of development pipeline that you use page references for?
The question that I'd like to ask is, do you want to have a conversation with these fleeting notes that don't have evidence to sort of support it, that haven't been crystallized through actually abstracting and really wringing out these ideas completely into a crystallized sort of declarative statement? Or do you want to have these conversations with these fast moving thoughts that are interconnected with all these different ideas? And we're going to get into the sort of referencing and how to actually find these ideas and how to sort of retrieve it. But this entire process is it's a frictionless way of abstracting out what something means to you. Now, if you want to go back to this, you can easily sort of block reference or page or hashtag, but the question is why? Because we're gonna get to this, but can I continue?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so basically, I'm reading a source, and then basically,
or let me just summarize what your perspective was, just so the audience can get it there, I think, a little better. So I think what you're saying is essentially you don't use all too many page references and stuff for topic sorting while it's in the fleeting note phase, because those thoughts are way too small, and you haven't yet determined what's significant yet. So you don't want to like clutter up your thinking space when you're actually trying to think through something. You're more just using your permanent notes then.
Exactly. And it's all about workflow as well. It's at what level of analysis do I want to have my conversation and actual thinking to happen? Is it going to be at the lower levels of fleeting and literature notes, or is it going to be at the higher levels of crystallized thought that are sort of declarative and clear? How's my audio, by the way? Is it choppy?
It's sounding great right now. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in these literature notes here as well, right? And power of Rome is that with this, I can open and close this with one click, right? It's all collapsible. So traditionally a literature note would be sort of a one phrase or one sentence or one or two sentences to describe, through this litmus test of seeing how well you understand what the author is saying. So with Rome, you can actually really drill down into what the author is saying in this sort of paragraph or sentence that you're pulling from, right? And so that's like the first level of analysis in regards to literature note. But then it's the same thing like you were talking about earlier, right? It's this idea of, on the block level here, we want a low resolution thumbnail of what's underneath, right? And so now I have this sort of thumbnail. I have two thumbnails that if I need to get to this information, open the wall text and it'll help there. And then same thing with the fleeting notes.
You were basically saying that like you're giving yourself these thumbnails so that way, like even though you have a lot of content indented underneath both of those top level bullets, I guess, you're able to very quickly just get a sense for what it was about, you know, so you're not spending the time reading through everything. You're just focusing on what's important. And then if like the literature notes seems important, then you can just uncollapse it, you know, but like you can make that choice
Yes.
in the moment.
And it also allows for that space to actually do the work in regards to seeing what you really think about what you're reading. You know, it's about really taking that time to put in that effort. And so now you have right now at the moment, you have three different sort of parent blocks. You have a reference notes block, literature notes block, and then you have the fleeting notes block, right? And so reference note here, so what I'm going to do is, this is where I actually add the sort of source material, right? So let's say this is an article from, let me go and do this. I'm going to hit Command K, and then I'll just write Lumen's card index, right? And then within the parentheses, I'll paste the actual link. And so that way it's like, if I need that information, it's right there with a shift click. And then underneath that, a child block, this is where I add sort of the metadata. So traditionally, when you look at sort of people's Zastins, what they're doing is they're inherent sort of pasting what analogs, slocks, or Zettelkastens, and they're sort of, okay, so you know, when we think about sort of Zettelkasten, it's like there's this idea that, you know, we're going to duplicate like a physical slip box in the digital realm, and what happens is there's inherent limitations with that. And so one of those things is traditionally all of this information would end up sort of on a page. But what I'm saying is that when you want to add metadata like author or recommended by, you can have it all as children blocks underneath the reference note itself. And so what it does is then if I go up here and then I go permanent notes, this is the sort of structure that we're going for, right? Underneath this parent block, you have three children. These are the sort of three legs of a tripod. You have the fleeting notes, the literature notes, and your reference notes. And so now your permanent note has something to sort of sit on top of, right? How's the audio, by the way?
Yeah, it's sounding great.
Perfect, perfect. Just let me know. And
Will do.
This is where it gets really, this is where it gets really interesting, because now it's like when they talk about bottom-up structure, right? What you have is you have all this information that you've abstracted, which is basically in the digital age in 2020, where you're inundated with notifications and pings and distractions. In a frictionless writing tool called Roam Research, you can actually abstract out what you're really thinking about, what resonated with you when you're reading some text or watching a lecture or whatever that may be. And then as you sort of bring up all these ideas, now you're actually ready to make a permanent note here, right? And it's,
oh, can I just ask real quick, just to make sure I understand the difference between reference notes and literature notes, is a literature note basically your notes from while you were reading the literature, and a reference note is just like your metadata of...
Exactly. That's the sort of like cool. Reference note would be the evidence or the bibliography, in other words. The literature notes is the sort of litmus test to see how well you understand what the author is saying.
Oh, so it's like literally what could you reference for more information is your reference notes.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay,
exactly.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah. And then again, so it's like you have these three legs that support this permanent note. And then from there, it's easy to sort of write out this declarative statement in regards to what you're sort of abstracting and sort of pulling up from this bottom up structure. And now when you get to this point, sort of, you have your crystallized thought. And we need to remember also, like when you do a declarative statement, you know, you look at the root of that word and it's clarer, so it's clarity. And so we want to have these clear statements from the text that we've abstracted, from the fleeting notes that we've sort of slowed down and sort of abstracted out multiple times as well. And then we get to this point here where it's like the permanent note is created.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was interesting because I thought I was going to sort of like coach you through this, because that way it would actually make sense. You know what I mean? But now that I'm doing it, it's so much like, I got to explain it all. It's important to remember, it's important to remember, by the way, that permanent notes or zettles or whatever you want to call it, these crystallized thoughts, these declarative statements, don't actually happen like this. So everything up to this point is actually incorrect, because you actually don't create this permanent note. Except for the very first permanent note you create, you actually don't do this. So I'm going to delete it. What you actually need to do is shift click on permanent notes, open that in the sidebar, and you actually have to refer back to your Zettelkasten in order to see the position of where this note is going to go. And so there's so much complexity that I need to explain that it's at a broad, with these broad strokes, I feel like it's going to lose the power and emphasis of this, right? So what I'm going to do is I need to find a place, I need to find a position. So I'm going to go and collapse this real quick. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different parent level blocks, conversations that I have going, right? And I see the literature notes, I see the fleeting notes here, and I go, where does this best fit? And I'm going to say Zettelkasten here, right? And then I go, okay, where does this best fit? And then I go, Zettelkasten, I think it's physical limitations, right? And then obviously I already wrote the permanent note here. So what I'm going to do is, I have to explain this part. I do, because it's a fundamental aspect of Zettelkasten. It's the idea of index.
Yeah, this is where it's starting to get a little more fun for me. Keep going.
Okay. Hold on, let me take my sweater off. Let me take my sweater off. Hold on.
Okay.
Because this is where the magic happens, right? Because fleeting notes, literature notes, reference notes, all of those are just building blocks, right? Really, the magic happens at the Zettel level, right? And so let me put this microphone back on. We can edit all this out, right?
Yeah, sure. So basically the Zettelkasten, the Kasten part is the claim itself, right? But you're talking about like, how do you organize all of these claims within this general box of notes?
It's also looking at the problem in a different way. You have a physical Zettelkasten. What you do is you pick up this index card and you're like, okay. You pick up the index card behind it and you go, okay. But how do you know what's 10 cards behind that? You know? And so when Luhmann had this problem, he was like, well, let's create an index or a keyword index of sorts. And what that was doing was it was allowing you to sort of see past the cards that you can't physically see. In a digital Zettelkasten, it's in the nesting. You can actually see the notes that are next in the conversation. So you have Zettelkasten phases, Zettelkasten dialogue autonomous, Zettelkasten physical limitations. You see what I'm saying? And so you can actually see the cards that are behind it. So the purpose of the index is different now. The granularity changed from seeing where the branches go. Now the granularity happens at what the permanent node is. This is a very interesting way of looking at it, right? And so now when I think about this hashtag that I'm about to create here, right? Where you place a note in the Zettelkasten is irrelevant, because you could actually place this up here. You could place it right here. You can place it anywhere, but the question that you need to ask yourself is, okay, well, where do I want to continue the conversation? Because that's going to show me, from the continued conversation, it's going to show me where the clusters are, right? And so now I say it's going to live right here. And so from here, I create an index. And basically what this is this is now giving me a thumbnail low resolution
idea of what this permanent node is going to be. So it's the hashtag is not a way to categorize it. It's not a way to sort of retrieve this idea again, like it's typically used. We're looking at it as the low resolution thumbnail of what the actual permanent node is. So I'm just going to go analog solutions, right? And then I'm going to go, now this is where I look back at my fleeting notes. I look back at my literature notes. I look back at the source material if I need it. And I actually write my permanent note here in the Zettelkasten, thematically connecting physical limitations with analog solutions. And so basically what I do is, I've already done the work here. I make this into a page, right? So now I have analog solutions. So this is a low resolution thumbnail of this entire permanent node. We're not using this as a way to categorize it. We're not using it to retrieve it. We're just using it as a thumbnail to show what's inside, just like we were doing over here with these summaries. So then I go back to my daily notes page here and I realize that, okay, this is my permanent note. So I go certain analog systems, right? Let's see if this is the right one. Let's see if this is the right one. Yeah, that's the right one, right? And then I realized that the permanent node is actually not the parent level block. When you look at the structure of this, I'm going to close this all down just so you can see it here. The permanent node is actually not the parent level block. There's actually a block above it. And this is actually important to realize that the very top level is the most important. This is actually where the conversation happens. It's actually the relevant nodes. So underneath relevant nodes, you have a child block, permanent nodes. Underneath permanent nodes, you have 3 children block, reference, literature, and fleeting notes, right? And so here I look at analog solutions. This is my sort of index, right? I go in here and I write analog solutions. And then what I do is this. I'm going to go ahead and expand all my permanent notes out. And you'll notice that these indexes here, right? They're on before every permanent note. This is because the block is where the granularity happens. So I can have more than one piece of information here. If I alt click or option click this and drag this over here, what I've done now is I've connected this idea of a permanent note with this actual permanent node that's already in the Zettelkasten. It's going to start making sense here in a minute. So what I do is I want a frictionless way of connecting notes and different conversations, right? Lumen wanted to have his notes connected at the furthest possible places, the furthest conversations away from each other, right? I'm at the very top. This is dealing with overall objective for acting. But if I can still relate this to analog solutions, I'm looking at the index and I'm going attraction to analog solutions. So that's interesting. Maybe I could stumble upon that later, right? And what I do is I start having this list, which I'm going to paste. This is what I do. Already done all the work. Now I have a list of all of these sort of permanent notes from the Zettelkasten itself, but they're just block referencing the index and the permanent note. They're just block referencing this block, if that makes sense.
Why? Why are you doing it like that versus doing it like page references?
I'm so glad you asked.
Great.
You have this structure here.
Yeah.
Right? And it's all collapsible. It's literally, if I go to my daily notes here, right? It's just a timestamp that's what's showing. If I expand it, there's complexity and complexity and complexity with multiple levels of abstraction, right? This is what's interesting, right? So I go to journey, right? And it's like, let's go find where journey is. Let's go overall objective. Let's find where journey is. Where's journey? Let's find journey. This right here is where I sort of block referenced it into my relevant notes here, right? And if I look up here, it's under character, completely irrelevant with Zettelkasten, because I placed this note here under Zettelkasten, physical limitations, analog solutions. That's the sort of conversation that's happening right now, right? And so on a completely different thread of conversation, I have journey. Now, I need to sort of expand this out a little bit just so you can see this, okay? So I'm gonna zoom out. Let me just, I don't know what the hell is going on. Let me go actual size, sorry. Whoa, crazy. Crazy. Okay, so I know it's sort of messy here, right? There's a lot of things going on, but you have to sort of see it at this level because this is the level that you're going to work from. The reason that I block reference this block, basically all the permanent notes in my Zettelkasten have the index in front of the permanent note itself. And then when I go to journey, where did journeys go? Let's go to character, it goes, I have a little CSS here too, by the way. It sort of highlights the block, so it shows you exactly the conversation that's going. So you go character, progression, unexpected, journey. That makes sense, right? There's a thematic connection. When you look at the root word of theme, it's just to put in a position. There's a thematic connection within the Zettelkasten that has a conversation that's going. And then the reason that I block references is because we don't want to just connect a bunch of ideas. We want to output. Right? And so if I go click on this reference right here, inline references, what happens, it opens up something very interesting, right? With one click, I have information here, right? I have information here that's all the different permanent notes that are connected to this permanent note journey when a character's journey sends them into the chaos of the frontier, right? And then I look at the indexes and I go journey avoidance. Journey meaning, journey position, journey destiny, journey realization, journey women, journey chaos, journey analog solutions. That's interesting. So looking at the CSS sprinkles that I have, I kind of made it look like a button, and I did that on purpose because I'm in the inline references here. I open this again. If I click on this one button, let's scroll down here. What I have is I have all the different relevant notes that are connected to it. I have the actual permanent note there. I have the reference note with all the metadata. I have all the literature notes with the multiple levels of abstraction. Let me do that again. All the fleeting notes with multiple levels of abstraction. So basically with one click, I'm able to see all the information that I've actually put into creating these ideas and thoughts. And so if I close this bullet point, the simplicity is it's all hidden behind that one note. What if I go into this note over here? It's the same thing. With one click, I can look at the literature notes, the fleeting notes, the permanent notes, and all the relevant notes. But the beauty of this is this. Let me go to my daily notes page here.
Yeah, wait, so let me, can you go back to where you just were, actually, if you don't mind? Where you were showing the inline block references that you're seeing. Because I just want to point out a general principle that I think is really cool, and I think that people can learn from. So there's this idea of exploratory search. Like, how do we find things when we don't know quite where to find them, and we don't know exactly what we're looking for, but we've got a pretty good feeling that we're like looking for something, and so one of the ways that you can do that is through following a scent, right? Like if the scent is far away, then presumably as you approach towards it, the scent gets stronger, And so what I'm seeing here with what you had with the inline block references is it was essentially a bunch of very high level headlines that would give you some clue as to whether it's worth exploring more. And then if that one's worth exploring more, then it's really easy to just click on that, expand it again, explore more, so like you're progressively unveiling more information and following scents wherever they take you.
Yes, and it's also realizing that the simplicity of having access to all the information that actually shows you how you got to that crystallized thought. Can I show you what I mean? Yep. Say you have a scent and you're like, you know what? Let's follow down Zettelkasten and let's see where that leads us. Right? Say I want to make an outline for a Threadapalooza, right? And my outline, the topic is going to be what the fuck is a Zettelkasten, right? And I'm like, well, let's start with this. So I'm going to go ahead and start bringing ideas in, right? And then I'm going to open up the references here and I'm going to go, well, let's see. Let's do vision, right? Vision of a Zettelkasten. And then I look here and go, oh, this is a great permanent note. or this is just a great idea. And what I'm doing is option dragging the different ideas, but it doesn't stop there because I just opened up this entire block, right? That has all the information that led me to that. So I can look back at my literature notes that I wrote. I can add that to the outline. This is all about output. I don't want to just have something just as an archive. I want output. And then I go in here, I can go into my fleeting notes that I've abstracted, and I can draw that in, right? And then I go, okay, that's great. Let's go down to the next idea. Let's just call this number 2, right? And the next idea is going to be, let's go vision. Let's go to physical limitations. I go down and I'm like, you know what? This is cool. Let's bring in the source here. Let's bring in this first literature note that I wrote here. It's not the literature note itself. It's just an abstraction that I had, or it didn't work that well. It's just an abstraction that I had. And then I can start building out this outline, right? And then I can also pull from even just simple fleeting note ideas that I had. So you were talking about, well, you want to be able to block reference these fleeting notes, but you can, but you're going to have context in which that fleeting note led to the permanent note, and it shows you in context of where it comes from. And then what I do is I just keep going down, and then say I keep going down, and I can basically write the entire article just by looking at the inline references, by pulling even the relevant notes. Everything is sort of draggable, and I'm dragging everything over, and it's like, oh, this is a great idea too. I'll bring that over, and I can get granular. I can get just the fleeting note that sort of sparked this entire idea. And so the whole idea is I can get to that point where I'm not focusing on collecting. I'm focusing on how can I retrieve this information in a simple way, utilizing the technology that's available. I understand that there's other note-taking tools out there, but it's the simplicity of this, because then I can go to the next phase and I go, you know what? I've hammered all the way everything out of Zettelkasten here, right? Let me scroll back up here. And I'm going to close this inline reference. Then I go to the next one and I go to, okay, phases doesn't have any linked references yet. Okay, let's go to dialogue. And I click on this one and I go, oh, autonomous dialogue. What does that mean? And I go in here and I start pulling in. And I can pull in any of the information that I've already done. I don't need to click into another page. Everything is all represented there. And it's all because of how it's nested. And if I've done my work, then what happens is I can pull from all these, the work doesn't go to waste is what I'm getting at, because the literature note abstractions that I do can be used. The fleeting note abstractions that I used can be used. But then I also have the position of where this was created. So even if I click on this permanent note here, it's interesting because it'll also show me the date of the time and place that it was created. So now I have not just context in regards to fleeting literature and permanent notes, but I have context to what was going on that day. Maybe my best friend passed away. Let me click onto that. Let me see the journal entries from there. And then it also shows me in context of where it's actually located in my permanent notes page. And I go, Zettelkasten dialogue autonomous. Cool. And I can just go in here and I can keep going. And so basically I can pull all the information together. And the purpose of all of this, by the way, I've done enough coaching sessions. I've done 40 coaching sessions, right? And I'm 40 for 40 here, right? I'm batting 1,000 in regards to showing people a little bit more granularity than this sort of Rome tour, but to be able to get to that aha moment of like, finally, there's a way to use the information that I'm consuming, and it's how it's structured allows for that. And it's, I can pull in these different ideas that it's the work that I did. And then the work doesn't go to waste. And it's simple. With one click, I have all that information. With one click. And then if I need to close it, I can close it. And so this is really the power of not necessarily a Zettelkasten. The Zettelkasten's been around since the 50s. It's the power that this practical note-taking system called Zettelkasten, finally the technology caught up. Yeah. Because the granularity of Rome happens at the block level because it's built on closure. It doesn't happen at the page level. It's not a markdown file. Even if it has bidirectional linking, the power is in the blocks and the granularity of the blocks. And it's, I urge people to get in contact with me. I want to know how I can break it. because at this point it's unbreakable. I've had Sonke, I've had 40 coaching sessions, I've had Matt McKinley, I've had Andy Henson, Brent, you know what I mean? It's like, it's unbreakable. And and I think it's a convergence that's happened. And if we ask a different question, it's not about how can I create a Zettelkasten in Rome? No, the question is, how can I create a Zettelkasten maximizing the technology that Rome offers? And by asking that different question, I got a different answer. And it's placing things granularly at the block level in order so I can use it though. I don't want to just have a bunch of notes. I want to be able to use it. So I can go through this outline here that I made earlier, and I've already got my Threadapalooza ready to go. All I did was just drag things in. This took me 15 minutes. But let me take a look at my permanent notes here. So I've got two different Zettelkastens. I got a permanent note here. So this one I have.
Well, let me
129.
Okay.
And so basically, if every Zettel takes 15 to 45 minutes, I'm going to say averaging 16 minutes, right? I've put in 36 hours worth of work. So when it comes down to actually sort of getting to this point where I'm outlining, the reason it takes 15 minutes is because I already did all the work. And that's what it's about. This is why I wanted to jump on a Rome tour with you, because I wanted to sort of show people that if you use this as a tool, you can finally solve that problem of, I read 25 books in this last year, but I don't remember any of it. I don't know how to use it. And that's the biggest thing that I realized. And it was just like, people need to understand that you can actually use this tool as a verb. You know, not just a collection, not just an archive, but yeah. So that's.
So I want to point out.
Yeah.
I just want to point out a few things. So one is, really cool. I think that you've shown a way of using Rome that's very distinct from mine, you know, and it's also a different sort of Zettelkasten than we saw on a previous tour with Joel Chan, just different ways of doing things, you know, and basically like the main difference that I'm seeing with my style versus your style is that your style is very, very block reference heavy, whereas mine is very page reference heavy, you know, and so what that gives you though, because you have this block ref heavy style and you have a consistent format that you use, then that makes it, that's very well done with the indentation. What that does is that makes it so you have a navigation heavy database. You know, like it's very easy for you to click from one to multiple places, you know, and like, it's as though you're walking through a space, you know, where I think the main difference with my style, or I wouldn't even say it's difference because I don't know, like everyone does block references and stuff, but, or you want to jump in here? Yeah.
Can I just add one thing? And if I could sort of crystallize what that looks like, is it's providing a GPS of where you're always located in your Zettelkasten, which is important because once these notes start accumulating, you always want to know where you are and also where you are contextually. Yeah. So that was the sort of main focus, because I don't want to just have a bunch of notes that are connected. I want to know, where did that note come from? Where's the context of that coming from? And to always have that in every place that I jump to, every door that I go down, I need to know contextually where that idea is coming from or where I am going to go next contextually. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it also allows for two different levels of clustering as well.
Yeah.
Traditional clustering happens at this sort of the nesting level, right? But you'll also notice the inline references will start clustering as well. Some of them will have 2, some of them will have 3, some of them will have 21. And then I look at it and I go, oh, no shit. Why? Because I'm focused on story. This is why I have 21 clusters here. in regards to relevant nodes. And it's really just this idea of, if I want to write something, all I need to do is have, with one click, open this up and see the context of everything in there.
Yeah.
And then keep going down that list. And it's just the blocks, the power of the blocks.
Yeah. And again, I want to say that like you've shown the power of the blocks in a way that I've never seen before. You know, like in my Rome tours, it's honestly, it's pretty rare that I see something that I've never seen before or never tried really before. You know, and it's usually like differences of imagination versus differences of ways of using, I guess. But you know, so like it's like what I'm asking is, if we're going at this question of, okay, how do we use the tools of Rome to make the best Zettelkasten possible? You know, I think that actually raises a really, like, a question that I want to ask you here, which is, what do you think are the, aside from the technical implementation that people use within Rome to achieve the goals of a Zettelkasten, like, what do you think, what do you think the goals are of a Zettelkasten, and what are the main principles that someone could follow within Rome in order to do that? Like, ignoring all technical implementation, like, what are the principles, what are the goals?
The first thing to remember, that you have to know what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to have a target. You have to have an aim. You have to know, like, okay, this is what I want. You know, I want to create this dialogue partner. I want to have this conversation partner. But after that, you have to know why you want it, because this takes time. And there's this gap. It's just like with anything that you want to make a habit. There's the place that you're starting from, and it's what you want. And the whole idea is, how can we bridge this gap? It's like, how do you lose 10 pounds? You know,
Yeah.
It's like New Year's resolutions. But what happens in February? Everyone's back. You know what I mean? Everyone stops going to the gym. Everyone knows how to do it. And I'm saying, no, put how to the side. Let's figure out what we want first. Let's have a target. Let's have an aim. Let's have a guiding star. Then we figure out the emotional connection on why we want it, because that'll sort of allow us to sort of get over these obstacles, right? Because what's going to happen is this. You're about to take a fleeting note, and you're like, ding, Twitter, crap, let me look at this. Or you're about to go into literature notes, and you're like, oh, I got a new email. Let me check this real quick. You know, and it's this idea of, dude, I mean, I was coaching these people, and it hurt listening to what they wanted and why they wanted and why they don't have it yet. Because they're inundated with consumption, about consuming. Oh my God, you have to read this new book. You have to read this new article. You have to know this new catchphrase. And everyone is consuming information, but no one's digesting it. And this is why it's like, I'm passionate about this, is because finally there's a way to slow down and really start thinking about all the information that we're inundated with.
Yeah.
And if you can structure this in a way where you can actually focus, like, it's not about collecting 200,000 fleeting notes. It's not about collecting everything that we can, because what happens, it becomes a graveyard. That's the worst feeling. Like, I'm listening to some of these people, they're like, oh my God, I'm like so many years old, and then they have nothing to show for it. You know? And I go, I don't want that. I don't want that for anybody. You know, I'm dealing with something right now where it's like, I saw, like, one of my best friends passed away, and it's like, what does he have to show for it? You know? And I'd hate to be 70, 80 years old on my deathbed going, shit, I read 2,000 books in the last 40 years, but there's no use for it. There's no archive, there's no sort of artifact from it. There's no use from it. Yeah, it connected. Yeah, it resonated with me, but I don't remember any of it. And so for me, it was, what a Zettelkasten is a way to utilize the information that we're taking in 2020 and beyond. because we're so inundated with consumption, this addiction to consumption. It's the same thing. Like if I see a 500-pound person on the subway, I don't look at them and judge them. No, I have compassion towards them. And it's the same thing when I see people go, gimme, 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 more information. I just want to know everything. And then they're not really digesting it. They're not slowing it down and going, what does this really mean in my own words? And the Zettelkasten has these points where it's like a litmus test to go, what does this really mean? What does this really mean? Let me think about this. What is the author really saying? What is resonating with me here? And then how can I crystallize this into a thought? How can I continue a conversation? How can I stumble upon this at a later time? And to me, it's like, dude, if Sonke released his book in 2017, Rome Research really dropped out of beta. I mean, maybe no judgment, but they were open to the public and started taking money in what, 6 months, right? And it's just like, this is all very new.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I have to start from scratch, right? I don't care, because I know that it's powerful, because even if it is completely wrong, it's like the 40 people that I've been able to walk through it, when they get that aha moment of like, wow, there's a way to slow things down. There's a way to actually think about what I'm thinking and to have like original ideas, and then to connect this with other ideas that I have, and to actually see my knowledge growing, like see it there. And because every note is written in my own words, and because it's backed by evidence, what happens is I like spending time with this. This is more important than Twitter threads. This is more important than reading 200 books. No, let me find that one article. Let me bring out everything I can out of it. Let me abstract everything. It'll take me 2-3 days to read an 8-page PDF, because I'll make 8 or 10 fleeting notes. But then what I'll do, once I have the fleeting notes, then I'll go back and process them at either that night or the following day or a couple days after. I'll abstract out the fleeting notes. I'll abstract out the literature notes, and then I'll add it to my permanent note, taking anywhere between 15 to 45 minutes. And then it's like, it's useful. And then I can see it. And there's like, it's this feedback where it's like, wow, I can see my thoughts. I can see what I'm interested in. That's the thing that blows my mind. And then not only can you trace it back, you can, with one click, see everything there. I mean, that to me, I don't know. I know what it is. It's fascinating.
I just want to thank you for putting forth a very creative and innovative approach to a Zettelkasten, in Rome. And like you said, I'm just so excited to see the ways that these conversations are developing. Like, I don't think, in the early days of Rome, I think a lot of people weren't really using block references quite as much. They've definitely gained a lot of utility since the early days, and you've shown just like in entirely different sets of use cases, I guess, that I think just adds so much to the conversation. And I think that any Rome user who reaches out to you for coaching, who works with your system and tries to implement a Zettelkasten in like 20 Zettels, I think that they'll be better at Rome as a result of it,